this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so in this episode, we actually see the conclusion to the Superfly fight, and we also are set up with a new antagonist, and he's interesting. I'll get to that. He's the guy who kidnapped Koichi and Tomoko Higashikata, so he's been built up for a bit, but it's definitely going to be a very important fight to go into. But in case it starts off with the fight against Kanadashi. And Kanadashi is already starting to make ways to escape, and when Josuke points out that he'll track him to the ends of the earth and that he will eventually find him, Kanadashi merely reveals that he's been wearing a mask the whole time and that they never actually saw his real face. And with that, he proceeds to try and escape Superfly. And when Josuke tries to climb up after him and try to fight him, Mikitaka merely responds that he doesn't mind and points out that it was ultimately his fault that he got stuck in the pylon and that he dragged everybody else into it, and that all he really wanted was to show that he was useful and that he could demonstrate that, and that he doesn't mind living in the pylon for a while because as he points out, it would feel very much like a spaceship to him if with that mindset in mind, he wouldn't feel too bad about it. However, despite all of that, Josuke decides to chase after Kanadashi anyway, using Crazy Diamond to repair the electrical cable that Kanadashi damaged earlier, and then proceeds to climb up the rope into the tower, with Kanadashi understandably being a little bit confused because, as he points out, he wasn't planning to attack anybody, and Josuke has since vowed that he's going to try and beat the shit out of him. So yeah, Kanadashi is understandably a little miffed that Josuke is still trying to fight him despite his friends bleeding, and decides that since Josuke is going to go out, then he's going to go all out too. At which point Josuke summons Crazy Diamond and tries to fight Kanadashi, but Kanadashi proves to be way too nimble for him to actually keep up, and eventually Josuke falls and slips off and is barely able to catch himself is barely able to pull himself back to safety. At which point Kanadashi merely remarks that he's seen through all of Josuke's tricks and that he realizes how his stand actually works, and points out how he feels like it may, while it is impressive from a physical standpoint, it really doesn't stand much of a chance against the guy who's been living in the pylon for literal years and is able to move around it rather efficiently. At which point, Josuke proceeds to climb up the pylon again and try to approach him, only for Mikitaka to warn him that he notices something strange and notices that he's actually got a small knife in his hand, and that he's actually carved up some sections of the pylon to fire blasts at Josuke. And Josuke, too late, realizes that that's going on, but is able to actually protect himself with Crazy Diamond. Only for Kanadashi to reveal that that's actually not the extent of his attack, and that he's actually been training for years to just kind of figure out how to redirect all the attacks back from the pylon, and describes it kind of like playing a game of billiards. And case in point, all of the blasts that he fired actually get redirected back into Josuke, and he's just barely able to defend himself. But he does eventually fall off the pylon again, and Kanadashi decides to cement his victory by trying to spit on Josuke, pointing out that at some point or another he's going to fall. And Mikitaka does confirm this, pointing out that Josuke's arms are too badly damaged to actually hold on for much longer. And of course, Kanadashi takes this time to gloat over Josuke, pointing out that he's finally beaten him. Only for Josuke to reveal that that's not actually the case, and that he's actually used his Crazy Diamond to repeal and repair things. And also asks Okuyasu if he was paying attention to how many of the blasts that he's actually redirected with Crazy Diamond. And eventually Kanadashi realizes too late that Josuke has actually used Crazy Diamond to transfer the blasts back to where they originally came from. Case in point, the space right behind Kanadashi's head, and he gets shot and starts bleeding from his head, and after that he's defeated. Later, after they've all calmed down and patched themselves up, Kanadashi merely expresses his sincerest apologies, pointing out that all he really wanted was to leave the tower, and he's lived in the tower for many years, and that it was ultimately Yoshihiro Kira's idea that he should leave the tower and go exploring. So all he wanted was to try and live on the outside world, but now he's realizing that he just wants to stay in the tower forever and never leave, because he was already happy there, and that he doesn't really need to go out into the outside world to make a man of himself. So, and at which point Josuke finally decides to grill him about the information that he knows, pointing out that he knows who Yoshikage Kira is, and that he is very important, and that he actually is very important to their mission, and that any information he can give would actually be helpful. But rather than answer the question mainly because he doesn't know, Kanadashi merely remarks that he had a brief conversation with Yoshihiro Kira, and that Yoshihiro Kira just kind of mentioned it in passing, but all he does is ask if there's a stand user named Koichi in the town, and points out that he's been eliminated. And that is enough to get Josuke and Okuyasu to spring in the action, and they leave to go to Morio, while Kanadashi and Mikitaka stay behind in the pylon and just kind of wait for them to come back. And also because of this incident, the entire incident, the pylon that Kanadashi calls home has actually been turned into a memorial landmark, where people are encouraged to actually come and visit him and bring him some supplies. And if they do that, he'll take a picture of them, but he won't tell them his name or show him his face. So because of that incident, he actually becomes a national landmark. Also, in the background of this entire thing, there's a scene of Yoshikage Kira trying to repress his urges because he sees a female co-worker pin her hair behind her head, and he kind of just develops some urges to actually kill her, but realizes it's not the time or place for that, and decides to just hold him back, at least for now. Although it's implying that he won't be able to hold him back forever, and he is eventually going to kill somebody because he can't help himself. So Josuke. Jotaro was definitely right on the money saying that they are on borrowed time, because it's only a matter of time before Yoshikage Kira kills again, and he's getting there. He's getting close to actually killing somebody, and he's only just barely able to repress his urges for so long. And also meanwhile, we see scenes with Rohan where he actually meets with the man. And the man only introduces himself as Mr. Kanoto. He's the realtor that Rohan actually called up and to ask him to evaluate his house. And Rohan is very skeptical about him, pointing out that he seems a little bit strange. And to make sure that this is indeed the man he called and hired, he uses his stand to actually incapacitate him, and then proceeds to use Heaven's Door to actually look through all of his personal information to make sure everything's legit. And it is. He finds out that Kanoto is actually the person that he did indeed hire, but also notices something weird about how the fact that Kanoto doesn't like anybody seeing his back. And while he does admittedly note that it's weird, and he merely just puts a safety lock in the man's body so that he can't actually harm him, and then proceeds to show him the house, only to realize how weird that Kanoto actually is. He moves around the house in a very weird way. In the few scenes that we've seen of him interacting with Rohan, the way he moves is that he will just slide around the house from wall to wall so that nobody ever sees his back, while also just kind of moving in such a way that he can't move that Rohan is just unable to see him, and even kind of spiders himself up the stairs in an effort to make sure that nobody can ever see his back, because because for whatever reason he's very odd. Other than that, the meeting goes great. Rohan is starting to get statements from Kanoto about how expensive it is to repair, which is understandable because Rohan's house is apparently very expensive, though Rohan can easily foot the bill for that. But the fact that he's so dead set on hiding his back is enough to get Rohan's curiosity, and then sets up a plan to actually get Kanoto in a vulnerable position where he can actually see his back. And to that he then proceeds to pretend that he has a back an itch on his own back so that Kenoda will come and scratch it for him. And then he proceeds to step on the carpet, which sinks under his feet a little bit. So, yeah, that's going to be a plot line that's going to be addressed in a later episode. But back to the scene with Josuke and Okuyasu. So, Okuyasu is mainly running around Morio shouting Koichi's name and hoping he finds him. Whereas Josuke has a bit more of a practical approach. He actually approaches Yuya Fungami in the hospital and tries to strike up a bargain with him, pointing out that he'll heal up Yuya's body, and in exchange, Yuya basically acts like a bloodhound for him and tries to find Koichi for him. So, and while Yuya is initially very against the idea of it, pointing out that Josuke was the one who put him in the hospital a second time. When Josuke decides he's going to leave, Yuya merely remarks that he was just joking and that he knows full well that he's fully responsible for himself being in the hospital. And then tries to haggle with Josuke a little bit more, only for Josuke to reveal that he actually healed Yuya about 10 minutes ago. At which point Yuya gets out of bed, realizing that Josuke was true to his word and didn't even wait for Yuya's response apparently before healing him up. And then proceeds to dress up into his clothes and admire himself for several minutes, pointing out that he is just as handsome as he remembers, but then proceeds to wonder if Josuke actually healed him up 100% because his eyes feel a bit more sunken in than they were. Only for Josuke to yell at him to focus and then proceed to ask him if his sense of smell is as good as he claims it is. And to generate the point, Yuya actually does demonstrate a sense of smell by sniffing the air and is able to determine very accurately that they came from not only are his groupies coming down the hallway to his room, but that he can actually sense that they're actually coming from the pachinko parlor. And case in point, they arrive. They're initially a little bit upset that Josuke is there until Yuya explains the situation and they back off. At which point he then proceeds to further explain his details by pointing out that he was able to sense that they were at the pachinko parlor because there was sweat covering their skirts, which means that they were sitting in a chair for prolonged periods of time and that they got hot and sweaty. And then also points out that one of them won at pachinko and actually got some chocolates for him. And that's more than enough for Josuke to actually be convinced that Yuya Fungami is able to actually help him. And they proceed to go look for Koichi. At which point they eventually stumble across Koichi's bag, which we know has been abandoned. And after doing some sniffing of it, they're able to Yuya Fungami eventually just kind of out of the blue asks if he has to fight anybody and help with Josuke with fighting. And Josuke asks where that question came out of the blue. And Yuya merely responds that the man who had kidnapped Koichi is actually standing behind him. And sure enough, as Josuke turns around, we actually are introduced properly to Terunosuke Miyamoto, who is apparently Koichi's kidnapper and had actually stolen Koichi away. And Josuke understandably chases after him, a little bit pissed off that he went after his friend and tries to grab his shoulder, only for Tomoko Higashikata to suddenly appear out of the blue and is completely swap places with Miyamoto. So at which point Josuke proceeds to fly into a bit of a rage, pointing out that he was more intent to go after Miyamoto and defeat him if he had merely gone after Josuke, but now that he's gone after his family, which is the last straw, and he then asks Yuya to actually find him and sniff him, and sniff him out so that they can actually fight him. And Yuya immediately responds that he doesn't want to help anymore because as he points out, Josuke, he doesn't want to help Josuke fight because as he just observed firsthand, he not only does Miyamoto nowhere to be found, but that he actually swapped places with Josuke's mother in a span of an instant. So yeah, he's pretty scared and upset. At which point Miyamoto himself actually reveals the situation of how his stand actually works. And that his stand is actually called Enigma, which has an ability that he then proceeds to explain. And then it flashes back to his kidnapping of Tomoko Higashikata, where after she arrived at the house and she notices a cup of coffee on the counter, and proceeds to go and drink it, and then notices something else under the cup of coffee, and then takes it only to discover that it's her panties, and that Miyamoto has actually written a message to her saying that it's her panties, and she then proceeds to freak out a little bit. At which point Miyamoto reveals himself, and Tomoko understandably grabs a knife in an effort to defend herself, and proceeds to swallow her saliva, which Miyamoto points out is a sign of fear. And then continues to try and freak her out even further to actually make sure that that's actually her sign of fear. And she understandably tries to ask who he is and where he came from and how he got in the house. And if he's planning to rob her or anything, pointing out that she doesn't have any money for him to actually rob, only for him to point out that he's not there to steal anything and that he's actually there to pay her, as he puts it. At which point she proceeds to swallow her saliva again, freaking out, and he starts to narrow in on her sign of fear. And at which point he pulls out another sticky bun and from using a piece of hiding it in a piece of paper, and then pulls it out, takes a bite out of it, and also points out that he also stole the cup of coffee as well at the same time, which starts to freak her out a little bit. And at which point he's able to actually finally narrow in on her sense of fear and attack her using Enigma. So, and here's the interesting thing about Enigma. Enigma works. It doesn't have any offensive abilities, but the way it works is that it can turn anyone into a piece of paper and Miyamoto can then fold them up that way. So yeah, that's how. So yeah, in case in point, and he has to specifically see their sign of fear. Otherwise his stand won't work. But because he's able to narrow in on Tomoko's sign of fear, he's able to actually incapacitate her and then swap her out with himself. So, and also points out that he did something similar to Koichi, having startled him on the way to school, which enabled him to actually see his sign of fear, which is blinking twice, and then he captured him as well. At which point it then cuts back to what's actually happening in the moment. And Yuya Fungami is staring at Tomoko's pocket and Josuke realizes that, and when Yuya again adamantly refuses to actually help beyond hunting Miyamoto down, Josuke decides that he's going to investigate himself and pulls a piece of paper out of Tomoko's pocket. And at which point, too late, Yuya Fungami realizes that how the stand actually works, and that Miyamoto has actually turned himself into a piece of paper to hide in her pocket, and Josuke is now starting to open it and let him out. So yeah, basically, long story short is that not only does it set up an arc for a future episode in that Rohan is going to try and deal with it, find out a way to see his realtors back, which is going to be it's a little bit weird. That is a little bit weird that Kenoto is unwilling to actually let anybody see his back, and I get the feeling that Rohan is going to find out something very unusual with that, because it's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Of course, everything is weird, but more to the point, it actually does a pretty good job of setting up the flow for these episodes. That as shortly after fighting off against Kanadashi, they then move into Koichi being kidnapped, and then Josuke just kind of has to find where Koichi is and try to defeat the person who kidnapped him, which is going to be either easier said than done, because apparently the man has the ability to turn people into paper. So yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see how are they going to fight something that can turn people into paper by observing their sign of fear. That's a very interesting idea for a stand, because obviously it's not going to be very easy to fight. It's going to be very easy to fight because again, no real physical capabilities in that regard. But the fact that it can turn itself into a piece of paper upon seeing somebody be afraid and show their sign of fear, that's kind of hard to beat. Because he can just turn anybody into a piece of paper whenever he wants. So yeah, Miyamoto, I think, is going to be an antagonist because of how he works. So yeah, that's gonna do it for today's episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and my review of it. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter in the description below. And also be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks I'm always saying thanks, so be sure to check those out in the description below as well. But, in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!